So, on to talking about Macbeth and the thirst for power. I'm not going to say too much about this one. I want to get into the next point pretty quickly. But Macbeth is clearly an ambitious, hard, and powerful and glorious. I mean, he's all the kinds of things that Hotspur is supposed to have been, right? A great warrior. Act One, Scene Two has lots of praises of his military prowess. He defeats more than one rebellion. He's like fighting on multiple fronts and defeats these foreign invaders and these rebels and so on. And Duncan is grateful for all that. Act 1, Scene 2 at line 65 is this back on page 6, is when he says, take that rebel, the Thane of Cawdor, execute him and give the title to Macbeth and so on. And then in Act 1, Scene 4, after this bit where Macbeth has interacted with Weird Sisters and Ross and Angus and so on, he comes to the court, and Duncan is effusive in his praise of Macbeth's prowess. At Act 1, Scene 4, line 15 or so, this is on page 14. "O worthiest cousin, the sin of my ingratitude even now is heavy on me. Thou art so far before the swiftest wing of recompense is slow to overtake thee," right? I can't do enough to thank you for your aid, your assistance in fighting against these rebels to my authority, my throne, and so on. And then, so after all this thanks, the king, Duncan, does something which affects Macbeth's plans for the future and so on, right? Sorry, in that previous scene, in Act 1, Scene 3, when that fate, that destiny, you're going to be king, had been laid out for him, one of the things that Macbeth had said is Act 1, Scene 3 at around line 144. It's on the bottom of page 12. It's not exactly a soliloquy. It's a monologue that the other people don't hear on stage. Talking about the fact that he's not sure what to make of the Weird Sisters' predictions, that he feels ambivalent about what they've just said, that if he really looks at the consequences of what they've predicted, he's frightened, like his hair is going to fall out, kind of thing. And he, at least for the moment, determines that he's not going to take action, right? He's just going to glide along on the path that he's on and see what happens. And he says at line 145, "If chance will make me king, why, chance may crown me without my stir," right? If I have a fate or a destiny to become the king of Scotland, I didn't have to do anything to become the Thane of Cawdor, right? That's my fate, that's my destiny. Then maybe I don't have to take any action to become king, right? Maybe King Duncan will have a heart attack and keel over. And by the way, Scotland is an elective monarchy, right? They don't have heirs to the throne in medieval Scotland. And maybe I'll just be chosen as the next king. So why do I don't necessarily have to do something, sinful, wicked, evil. I don't have to kill Duncan to be the king. If chance will have me king, why, chance may crown me without my stir, right? But while in Act 1, Scene 4, when Duncan is thanking Macbeth, he finishes all of his kind of effusive gratitude and so on, and then he turns to his council. This is Act 1, Scene 4, around line 33, and addresses, okay, we've just weathered 2 rebellion/invasions. Our throne is stable again, in large part thanks to Macbeth. So thanks to him. And now I've got to kind of start thinking about our future here in Scotland. And the next thing I want to do is to, he says at line 35, that we will establish our estate upon our eldest Malcolm, whom we name hereafter the Prince of Cumberland, which honor must not accompany to invest him only, but signs of nobleness like stars shall shine on all deservers. And so in kind of making and putting the pieces back together after these rebellions and invasions, and trying to kind of reestablish the stability of the kingdom, Duncan names his son as heir presumptive, right? The Prince of Cumberland is going to be like a Prince of Wales or something like that, right? Now, this is an aberration, right? In medieval Scotland, they didn't have a system of, kings' sons succeed when their fathers die. And so he's done something that was unexpected, right? And for Macbeth, this changes his calculations. He says at line 48 now, again, in an aside, right? So not for everybody on the stage to hear, but certainly for us in the audience to hear, the Prince of Cumberland. That is a step on which I must fall down, or else o'er leap, for in my way it lies. Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand, let that be which the eye fears when it is done to see. So he had said in the previous scene, okay, I don't want to be a killer. I don't want to be a murderer. I don't want to be a regicide. I mean, he's a fighter and all that kind of stuff, but he doesn't want to, kill someone in order to become king. And so he had said, if chance will make me king, then chance will, bring me to this without my raising a hand. Well, chance at this point has suddenly put an extra barrier in front of him. And so now he says, well, I mean, I can't let chance be enough. I'm actually going to have to take some kind of action to bring my destiny, my doom, my fate into being. I'm going to have to deal with the fact that there is an heir to the throne and it's not me. And so this is one of the things that goes into the calculations now as he starts thinking about, wanting to kill in order to make himself king, which is his ambition, right? And he does want to be king. And as I say, in Act 1, Scene 5, there are these indications of stuff that Lady Macbeth says, which sort of hint that they've had conversations about whether or not Macbeth has it in him to make himself the king. Now, the big point in this section of my lecture this morning, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of nature, the natural, the supernatural, the unnatural, things associated with nature. And if you did a word search in the whole text of Macbeth, and you took out words like a and the, and probably like man, woman, thane, but like other kinds of words that show up in this text, the word nature or natural or unnatural comes up, I mean, probably more than just about any other thing in the text. I think time and maybe words associated with time, those come up probably the most in this play, this tragedy. But then nature would be, I think, a pretty close second. I've never actually done that, but I just, having read through the text so many times, the number of times you see references to things that come out of nature, it's really broad. Now, those different terms about nature, they work in a whole bunch of different ways. One of them is just on the idea of what we might call human nature, and what the characters in this play just call nature. That's like something about like your character, your makeup, like who you are as a person. And so just to give you an example of that, in Act 1, Scene 5, this is on page 16, Lady Macbeth is alone with a letter. So this is a long soliloquy of hers. And she reads this letter of Macbeth has written to her about his interaction with the Weird Sisters, and that things are starting to come into some kind of this path that he's on or whatever. And so she says at line 11 or so, "Glams thou art in Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised." And then she says, "Yet do I fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without the illness should attend it." So when Macbeth starts off in this play, his nature, like that's using the term that Lady Macbeth uses here, by which I think she means something along the lines of what we would say character, right? Your makeup, is one where he aspires to things that are greater than he has in his hands, right? That he wants to be something bigger and better. And, like maybe in our 20th and 21st century kind of view, that seems sort of normal, right? But I mean, in terms of like the kind of the medieval and early modern worldview, there is that idea that you're born into a place and you're sort of supposed to stay there, right? If you're born to be a farmer, you're born to be a farmer for, from the day you're born until the day you die kind of thing. There is, of course, the idea that people are kind of changing their stars and trying to do different kinds of things, right? Leave the farm, go to the city, try to find a way to make a fortune for yourself, and so on. But in any case, the idea of a nature being sort of fixed, and that he is, he wants to be something better than he is, but he doesn't have the wickedness, the determination to make that happen. He'd like to be king, but he's not necessarily Machiavellian enough, she thinks, for him to do that. So we see references to what we might call human nature, or what we might call character, all the way through the play. This is just one example of it. There's, of course, things that are outside of nature, which we might think of as supernatural. That's not the phrase that they would use, right? But like, say, the weird sisters, those witches that are of the world but not in it, or in the world but not of it, kind of thing. They're part of. They kind of. It's like a sort of Venn diagram. They are part of nature, but they're also part of outside of nature somehow, right? They are supernatural, and the things that they're gonna. I mean, not to kind of give you too many spoilers, but you probably know these things happen in the play, right? There's going to be a ghost. There's going to be omens, prodigies. There's going to be apparitions, all kinds of stuff. In fact, in later on in the play, for instance, in when Macbeth is getting in Act 2, you've read this for today, as Macbeth is getting ready to go and do the terrible deed. This is in Act 2, Scene 1. Yeah, Act 2, Scene 1 at around line 35 or so. Macbeth has a vision of a dagger. This is on page 25. Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand. This is Macbeth in soliloquy. He's getting ready to go off and do this, the murder. Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, yet I see thee there still, right? He can see this dagger. He can't touch the dagger. So it's not part of nature somehow. I mean, if he had modern psychology, right, we'd say he's hallucinating, this is psychosis or something like that. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight, or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? I see thee yet in form as palpable as that which now I draw. So he has a real dagger, and he's got this imaginary dagger in front of him, right? And he's kind of comparing them. I can touch this one. I can feel this one. I'm going to use this one. But that one, the imaginary one, the supernatural one, the one that's outside of nature, is leading me on. And suddenly it's going to have blood stains on it. So here's this idea of something that's outside of his nature, outside of our nature, outside of material nature. Okay, another way that nature gets used in the play. So you've got the human nature character, you've got the supernatural and that kind of thing. Another way that nature functions in this play is the idea of things having a kind of a natural place, right? That nature is set up in one way. It's supposed to operate in that whole, kind of the whole system is supposed to operate in a particular way. And we're going to see that natural order of things, again, they don't quite use the term natural order of things, but they think of things, that is, this play imagines things as having, this is the way it's supposed to be. And so one reference to it early on in our play is in Act 1, Scene 2, that I want to just kind of look at. And it's a way that, so there's a really, in my mind, a really good essay about the idea of nature by a guy called Roland Barthes, who was a semiologist from France in the 1960s or whatever. But I remember reading that essay, and that one of the things that I really took away from that essay that really meant a lot to me at the time was the concept that, we call things natural all the time, but the natural is not, what we call the natural is not actually somehow nature, right? That tends to be a human import onto the existence that's out there to try to explain it in some way, and then we call these things natural or unnatural. Anyway, so when one of the military figures the captain is describing the way that Macbeth has dealt with the rebels and the invaders at the beginning of the play. This is Act 1, Scene 2, around line 33 or so. It's on page 5 of our text. So it looks like the odds are totally stacked against Macbeth. And Duncan says, dismayed not this our captains, Macbeth and Banquo? And the captain says, yes. This is at line 35, I say, yes, as sparrows, eagles, or the hare, the lion. And so what he's referring there is to the idea that there is a kind of a natural order of things, right? That eagles are superior to sparrows on the kind of the natural hierarchy of birds. And by the way, just as a kind of side note, this play is obsessed with birds and bird imagery. I would love to see someone think about, writing about birds in this tragedy would be really fascinating. It's not one of the topics that I've got listed for term papers, but Writing about birds would be really fascinating, I think. Anyway, as sparrows, eagles, or the hare of the lion, right? Lion, the king of the jungle, hare, scared rabbit. We talk about that kind of thing, right? So the idea so Macbeth is not scared, is what he means, right? There's a kind of sarcasm to what the captain says here, and the reason why we know he's not scared is because Macbeth is an eagle or a lion, and these rebels are like sparrows or like hares. They're lesser. They're in the natural order of things. They are less important, less significant, less great than an eagle or a lion. So there's a kind of a natural order to things, and so after the murder of Duncan in Act 2, Scene 4, you've got this old man and Ross are sort of talking about this tempestuous night in which Duncan was murdered. And Act 2, Scene 4, it's on page 37. And the old man says, he comes on, 70 I can remember well, right? I have lived 70 years and I've got a lot of experience. And within the volume of which time I have seen hours dreadful and things strange, but this sore night, the night on which Duncan was murdered, hath trifled former knowings. And Ross describes some of the strange things that they've heard, and the old man says at line 11, "'Tis unnatural, even like the deed that's done. On Tuesday last, a falcon, towering in her pride of place, was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed." Right? So the natural order of things would have a falcon above an owl, but somehow an owl, a lower figure, has subverted the natural hierarchy and has killed a falcon. And that is an analogy, right? It's analogous thinking to what's been happening in our world, right? That someone of a lower status has raised their hand against and murdered our king. Right? So the way that the nature is supposed to be working it's no longer working correctly, right? So maybe a sparrow could fight an eagle, maybe a hare could fight a lion, but definitely like an owl has fought a falcon, right? A lower order has defeated an upper order, and so the natural world seems off kilter. It's askew, right? Now, how that idea about looking out at nature and the way this supposed hierarchy of animals and so on reflects on the play is in terms of the nature of human relationships, right? So when Macbeth is for a moment, he talks himself out of killing Duncan one more time. This is in Act 1, Scene 7. Act 1, Scene 7 on page 20 and 21, he gets another soliloquy, and this is a tragedy that's full of soliloquies. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, they're constantly alone on stage, externalizing their thoughts for the audience, and we're following their thought processes. And Macbeth is going to talk himself out of killing Duncan again. I mean, he talks himself into it and out of it, into it and out of it, all the way through Act 1. Anyway, he says at the beginning, if it were done, this is the beginning of his soliloquy, if it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well, if it were done quickly, right? If the whole thing could be, rolled up into one thing and I could do that one thing, that would solve it. But I'm aware of the fact that if I do this one thing, that is kill Duncan, it leads to a whole bunch of consequences I'm going to have to keep dealing with, to the end of time, basically. So that is one reason why he's sort of talking himself out of it. And then he's talking about his duty, his obligation to Duncan, who is very foolishly, from Lady Macbeth's point of view, has put himself in their power by coming to visit them in their own castle. And they're going to have this plot for how to get rid of him. At line 12, Macbeth says, again, he's talking to himself here, he says, "He, Duncan, is here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject," right? So defining his human relations to him as a family member and as, he's my king, and I can't raise my hand against him in that context. Strong both against the deed. And then second, then, as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself, right? I mean, he's my guest, and there's a philosophy of hospitality. As his host, I should be protecting him, not killing him, right? I mean, this is before the Bates Motel and Psycho and things like that, right? I have an obligation to him. And so those are, again, ideas about like what is natural about, human relationships and how they're meant to be understood. all of this is being, undermined by the action that's going to take place. Because in Act 2, Scene 3, so Act 2, Scene, between Act 2, Scene 1 and Act 2, Scene 2, that's when Macbeth kills Duncan. And the consequences of that killing are going to be brought out in Act 2, Scene 3. There's the famous, there's the scene of the porter, the guy who's supposed to open the door to these people who are knocking. And his little prose bit there at the beginning of Act 2, Scene 3, this is on page 30, these are a bunch of references to like fairly recent historical events in Shakespeare's time about equivocating, which is a Jesuit practice and associated with the gunpowder plotters and so on. So these are some of the ways that you can kind of date the play. But I mean, it does get at that kind of key concept of the equivocator, right? The person who's equivocate just like literally means to speak out of both sides of your mouth. The theory of equivocation was that you could speak half truths and not be accused of perjury or perjuring your soul. This was a Jesuit theory about equivocation and so on, and it's going to be important when we think about what happens with what the Weird Sisters have promised to Macbeth and so on. But in any case, Macbeth has killed the king, and Lady Macbeth chides him in Act 2, Scene 2 for not doing it as effectively as he could and so on. And then these people show up, and then the murder is going to be discovered here in the middle of Act 2, Scene 3. Act 2, Scene 3, around line 61, on page 33, Macduff has gone into the chamber where Duncan was asleep and where he's been murdered, and comes out, "Oh, horror, horror, horror! Tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee," right? I can't even put into words what's just happened here, this murder of Duncan. And at line 65, "Confusion hath made her masterpiece. Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple and stolen thence the life of the building." So this is the idea that Duncan is like divine, as a sacred figure, a sacred monarch, right? And that someone has done something, not just murder, which is already bad enough, but profane, sacrilegious, that someone has killed a king. That's extra bad somehow, right? And so Macbeth has to kind of fake it, goes in, and one of the things he's going to do is he's going to kill the people who might be witnesses against him. And he claims to have done it in a frenzy. But when he's describing what drew him to go nuts when he saw the death of Duncan, he says at line, this is on page 35, Act 2, Scene 3, at about line 109, "Here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood, and his gashed stabs looked like a breach in nature. For ruin's wasteful entrance. There the murderers," right? So this death, this murder of the king, and the body, the corpse that's left there, looks like a breach in nature, right? This is the idea that that nature has been torn apart, and everything is out of order now and is not working the way it's supposed to be. And so, like, there's going to be this kind of chaos and this unnaturalness that's going to sort of hang over Scotland for the rest of the tragedy. Okay, now the next point, I'm going to run out of time, so I'm just going to allude to it, and I'll pick it up as our first point at our next lecture, is just that, thinking about nature and the natural order of things and so on, there is a way of thinking about nature as it's supposed to deal with the sexes, the relations between the sexes, the natural gender roles and so on, what's natural for a woman to do, what's natural for a man to do, and so on. And Lady Macbeth represents a real sort of challenge to that. You can see one just like brief allusion to it in the fact that the witches are themselves, they're female, but not exactly female. Well, this is one of the things that Banquo says when he first sees them in Act 1, Scene 3. And so we're going to talk next time. We'll start by talking about the idea of how we think of gender in terms of nature and the natural order of things. Okay, so Tuesday then we'll have a discussion of the middle section of Macbeth, and then next Thursday we'll have I'll have a sort of a bonus lecture on thinking about your term papers and so on. So keep reading your Macbeth. If you want to get started on your term paper, you should feel free to get started. You can send me questions if you've got any kind of questions. Think about whether or not you want to make that switch to pass, no pass on the class and so on. And I think that's it. So I'm just going to stop here,